The 90s were an amazing time for comic books. We saw record-breaking numbers like never before. Just like X-Men #1, that currently holds the record for the best-selling comic at 8,186,500 copies sold. We got amazing comic book artists that just became rock stars in the comic industry, like Todd McFarlane, Jim Lee, and obviously the best foot artist in the world, Rob Liefeld, and of course many, many others. They gave us crazy new character designs with packs and satchels everywhere, massive traps, and then of course great storylines such as the death of Superman, and also Superman got his long hair mullet. This was the time of abundance. Tons of new comic publishers is popping up left and right, giving us creative new covers like foil covers, chrome covers, little cards on the cover with holographic images, all sorts of things. And customers were just buying it up, buying multiple copies of the same book, because during that time, people realized that old comic books like Action #1 were now fetching $10,000, $20,000, even $50,000. And so people were like, well, we want to get in the action. They bought tons of copies thinking this was going to be the retirement in the future. Then of course there's the cartoons. Who can forget the cartoons like X-Men and Spider-Man? Just by looking at the image, I can hear the theme song in my head. The 90s might have been the best time to be a comic book fan. There was comic shops almost on every single corner. But just like most things, when there's a massive comic boom, there's gonna be a comic book crash. With so many books being printed in the hundreds of thousands, if not millions, most of them didn't hold their value over time. So in this video, we're gonna look at the top 10 90s comic books for investing. We're gonna see which held their value and which will continue to rise and hold their value over time. New Mutants 87. This is the first appearance of Cable. He actually first appeared as a baby in X-Men 201 back in 1986 as Nathan Summers. But at the time, they didn't know that Nathan Summers was actually going to be Cable, and they decided to write that in later down the road. In the beginning, Cable's origins were actually unknown. The editor wanted to shake things up, so they tasked Simonson and Liefeld to come up with a new leader that was the opposite of Professor X, a man of action. So they came up with a military man from the future. Cable went on to appear in many of his own comic lines, and along with animated TV shows, movies, and even video games. He appeared alongside Deadpool on many occasions due to their different personalities that made for interesting comic books. He was played by Josh Brolin in Deadpool 2. So in 2012, a 9.8 CGC graded was $183. 5 years after that, in 2017, a 9.8 is $520. And now in 2022, a 9.8 is going to run you about $610. That is a 5-year return of 17%, a 10-year return of 233%. The record price ever once sold for a 9.8 was $1,030. And if you compare that down to at the bottom, you'll see the Dow Jones, S&P 500, and other stocks along with real estate. You can see that 233% beats the S&P 500 along with real estate and other things. Now, obviously, each one of these is a different type of investment and they all have their pros and cons, but this kind of gives you an idea that comics can be as great a return as stocks, real estate, other things like that. Super Mario Bros. #1. Mario first appeared in 1981's Donkey Kong video game, but simply just named Jumpman. He later got his own series in Super Mario Bros. For the Nintendo Entertainment System, which went on to sell 40.24 million copies, making it the best-selling video game of all time for over 20 years. In 1988, former editor Jim Shooter got some investors together and tried to buy Marvel Entertainment, but submitted the second highest bid and didn't get the company. He went on to create his own comic company called Valiant. Before releasing their own new characters, they decided to try and license characters first. With Nintendo becoming this new up-and-coming craze, they decided to license Nintendo and release a handful of Nintendo-based comics, which in the end actually lost them money and the series didn't do very well. Mario went on to star in many, many other video games, had his own TV show, cartoons, movies, and now has an up-and-coming animated movie. In 2012, a 9.8 was about $75. 5 years later, in 2017, it's $218. Now that's gonna run you for a 9.8 is $28.50. That is a 5-year return of 1,207% and a 10-year return of 3,700%. Now clearly this is beating out the stocks I have listed like Amazon and Apple, which were behemoths over the last 10 years, and obviously the Dow Jones and S&P 500. With Nintendo making a theme park over in Japan and now making one here in America, also them getting their hands into movies such as the new Mario Brothers movie that's coming out, I think towards the end of the year, you can expect Mario's popularity to grow even more over time, which would make these comic books more valuable in the long run. San Diego Comic-Con #2. Hellboy was created by Mike Mignola, and his first prototype appeared in the pamphlet for the Great Salt Lake Comic Convention in 1991. But in that pamphlet, he didn't quite look like the Hellboy we know today. A few years later, looking a little closer to what he'd ultimately look like, he appeared on the cover of Dime Press #4, an Italian fanzine, but only on the cover, not inside the comic itself. His next appearance would be the San Diego Comic-Con #2, where he had a short story and looked like Hellboy we know today. It was just in black and white. His first full color appearance would be in John Byrne's XMen 21. Hellboy would go on to appear in his own line of movies that's been rebooted before, along with video games and some animated movies. In 2012, a 9.8 would run you about $230. 2017, it was $645, and then 2022, it is now $805. 5-year return of 25%, a 10-year return of 250%, with a record price in 2022 selling for $900 for a 9.8. Hellboy was more of an underground popular comic character. It wasn't until the movies came out that he saw mainstream appeal. They actually rebooted the series, and that didn't do very well. But that won't stop Hellboy. In the long run, this character is just going to get more popular. More people know about him today than they did before. And I guarantee you at some point they'll try to reboot the series or something. So in many years to come, I can still see Hellboy with mainstream appeal. Bone #1. Bone first appeared in a college newspaper by creator and artist Jeff Smith. Jeff actually went to Ohio State to become a cartoonist, drawing cartoons for the college newspaper called The Lantern. These comic strips were later published in a graphic novel titled Tales from the Lantern, which had less than 1,000 print run. Then in 1991, Jeff launched his own comic company called Cartoon Books and published Bone. He won tons of awards for this series, including 10 Eisner Awards. Now I know what you guys are thinking. Didn't Bone just get dropped from Netflix? Yes, it did. But that doesn't stop it from being on this list. Bone 1 had a very, very small print run of only 3,000 comics, when most comics during this time was in the hundreds of thousands, if not millions. They tried to turn this into a movie before from Nickelodeon. They also tried to turn this into a series from WB, and Netflix is just the latest. But even before Netflix, this comic was seeing steady gains, doubling in price before the whole Netflix thing was ever announced. And trust me, one day we'll see a series based off of this. In 2012, a 9.2 sold for $560. In 2017, the same 9.2 sold for $862. And then 2022 sold for $5,665. That is a 5-year return of 557%, a 10-year return of 912%. It had a record price of $13,200 for a 9.8 in 2021. Batman Beyond #1. After the massive hit animated show Batman the Animated Series, Warner Brothers wanted something new to continue its success. They decided to change things up and make a brand new character not from the comic books. They came up with the idea with Batman being old and retiring, but needing something to replace him. This is how we got Batman Beyond. Although Terry McGinnis had his Batman Beyond comic series, he wasn't officially in the DC continuity. Superman Batman 22 from 2005 was the first comic to depict McGinnis existing in the future of Batman. Some also consider Superman Batman Annual 4 from 2010, but Terry officially entered the DC continuity in 2014, the New 52 Futures End. In 2012, a 9.8 sold for $108. In 2017, it sold for $552. And then in 2022, a 9.8 would sell for $22.15. That is a 5-year return of 301%, a 10-year return of 1,950%, with a record price of a newsstand selling for $9,000 in 2022. Now with them adopting kind of the Batman Beyond storyline in the new Flashpoint movie. We're gonna see probably old Bruce Wayne. There's also been talks of them rebooting the Batman Beyond animated series. So this could be something that we see down the line, a direction that Warner Brothers goes. So this character is just gonna get more and more popular. So to me, this has some long-term appeal. Amazing Spider-Man 361. For 4 years, we just had one symbiote, Venom. But in 1992, that all changed. We got Carnage. Right out of the gate, Carnage was extremely popular because he has everything Venom was, but more. While Venom was more of an anti-hero, Carnage was a straight up evil villain. And during the height of the 90s comic craze, this was the type of comic that people wanted. Over the top, ultra violent, and pure madness. Once Carnage proved to be a huge success, the word on the street was symbiote, and they did not stop. The 90s was a perfect time for these creatures, and they were everywhere: comics, cartoons, even video games. In 2012, 9/8 would sell for about $152. 2017, 9/8 would sell for $307. And in 2022, 9/8 sell for about $804. That is a 5-year return of 162%, a 10-year return of 429%, with a record price in 2021 for $16.20. Now, Carnage was the main villain in Venom 2, and that brought this book to new heights. It has since dropped quite a bit from its height because they kind of killed him. But that still won't stop this comic from being on this list. Carnage is a massive character in the comic world. Yes, maybe the movie didn't do him too well justice, but he'll be back eventually. But even if he doesn't come back, this comic will still go up in value over time. Every person that collected comics in the 90s knows Carnage. This book will continue to gain in popularity and go up over time. X-Men 266, the first appearance of Gambit. There is a debate to what Gambit's first appearance actually is. Technically, his first published appearance is in X-Men Annual 14 in July of 1990, where he appeared in just a couple panels. But that was actually a mistake. Originally, X-Men 266, which came out in August of 1990, was supposed to be published first. But since there was a mistake, the annual actually came out 1 month prior. Most collectors consider X-Men 266 Gambit's first full appearance and gravitate towards that book. And X-Men Annual 14, it's kind of just like a cameo appearance. The X-Men landscape is vast, but every once in a while, a mutant comes along that stands above the rest. With Gambit being in many different forms of media, from cartoons, video games, movies, even a solo film that tried to get made, he is a fan favorite and one of the most popular X-Men. In 2012, 9/8 would sell about $210. 2017 for $347. And then 2022, 9/8 sell for about $1,056. That is a 5-year return of 204%, a 10-year return of 403%. A record price of a 9/8 sold in 2020 for $1,700. Gambit is probably arguably the most popular X-Men to come out of the 90s. And that's why this book is continually going up. Even with the movie news falling through, guarantee you they'll figure out eventually, and that will just bring it to new heights. But even that doesn't happen, you can still see steady growth over time. I am not worried about this book. This is a great book to get. Spawn 1. This is the first appearance of Spawn. Spawn was created by probably the most famous comic book artist of the 90s, Todd McFarlane. He created when he's just a kid, and it took him many different iterations until he became the Spawn we know today. If you follow McFarlane's artwork before Spawn, you can see underlying art that would all come together to capture the icon Spawn we see today. Not happy with the contract that they had, Todd McFarlane and a few others left the big guys at Marvel and DC to start their own comic company called Image Comics, where each of the creators would own their own character. Before that, they were just work for hires for either Marvel or DC, not owning their characters. Todd McFarlane thought this would be the perfect time to release his childhood character. The first issue of Spawn was a massive success, selling 1.7 million copies. It now stands as the longest running creator-owned comic series, beating out Cerebus after issue 300. In 2012, a 9/9 sells for about $300. In 2017, a 9/9 sells for $1,097. And in 2022, a 9/9 sells for about $5,151. That is a 5-year return of 370%, a 10-year return of 1,617%, a record price in 2021 for $9,995. Since this book was printed at 1.7 million copies, and it was in the 90s when a lot of people took very good care of their comics, there's a lot of 9.9s available. That's why I put 9.9s on the list. I mean, Spawn continues to be a massive popular character. He's had his own video games, his own TV shows, his own movies. I mean, his latest issue of King Spawn #1 sold almost 500,000 copies, way more than any other comic has sold recently. So Spawn is going to continue to gain in popularity and continue to see increases in prices over time. Batman Adventures 12, the first appearance of Harley Quinn. In the early 90s, Batman the Animated Series was a massive hit, scoring many Emmys, which was near unheard of for a cartoon aimed at kids. During its 22nd episode, they decided to give Joker a female henchwoman, which would later become his love interest. She was never part of the comics. She was created solely for this animated series. Bruce Timm, who created the show, saw the original designs and made a few changes that were inspired by one of his beloved Golden Age comic characters, the Daredevil. 1 year after her appearance on the show, she became so popular they put her in her first DC comic, Batman Adventures 12. Harley Quinn grew in popularity over time, appearing in numerous comics and animations to having her first live-action role in Birds of Prey, the TV show. But later she became more well-known with her breakout role from Margot Robbie in Suicide Squad. She has had multiple movie appearances and even her own animated TV show that's still going on. It's on HBO Max. It's actually pretty good. In 2012, a 9.8 would run you about $218. In 2017, it's $1,610. Now, its average is about $3,201. That is a 5-year return of 99%, a 10-year return of 1,368%. It had a record sale of 4,551 in 2001. Harley Quinn is a massive, massive character. She's probably the most female cosplayed character out there. I mean, just walk to any convention, you'll see Harley Quinns everywhere. This book will continue to grow and grow over time, with Harley Quinn getting more and more popular. I mean, she has her own animated show. She's had her own movies. And she's so good from a merchandising perspective that they're gonna push this person even more and more and more. So expect to see this book grow way more over time. New Mutants 98. Now we're on to our #1, who is arguably the most popular character to come out of the 90s. Deadpool was created by Rob Liefeld, who was originally just a copy of Deathstroke from DC's New Teen Titans. They even ripped off the name. Instead of Slade Wilson, they called him Wade Wilson. In the beginning, Deadpool's personality wasn't how we see him today. That took many years of writers on the series to firmly establish the merc with the mouth. Even though Deadpool continued to grow more and more in popularity, also being featured in animated shows, video games, and even a brief time in the X-Men movies, like X-Men Wolverine's Origin, it wasn't until Ryan Reynolds' 2016 Deadpool solo film that he became a household name. That movie went on to bring in nearly $800 million at the box office off of a $58 million budget. In 2012, a 9.8 would run you about $460. In 2017, a 9.8 would run you about $917. Today, a 9.8 runs you about $1,888. 5-year return of 106% and a 10-year return of 310%. Now, this might not be the biggest gains like compared to some of these others on this list, but this is a safe bet. This is one of those like blue chip stocks. This is like a blue chip book. Deadpool will continue to grow more and more. He's now in the MCU. Disney already confirmed that they're making Deadpool 3. He's just going to gain more and more in popularity. He's also very good with merchandising, which means that they'll push him more into a million other things. Back in the 90s, there's a video clip of a newscaster going into a comic shop during the Death of Superman craze. And he interviewed this lady and she had like 10 copies. And he's like, why are you buying 10 copies? And he's like, this is gonna be my kid's college fund when, he's older, and I'm gonna sell these for a bunch more. But that Superman didn't really pan out. But this is the type of book that you can buy, stash away, and then when your kids are older, this will be their college fund. That's it. I'm David from Comic Book Investments. Hope you like this list.